I protect all of my passwords, accounts, and devices using Aura. I get instant alerts about threats, like if my email or password are found on the dark web, so I can fix the problem fast. Try Aura free for 2 weeks using my link below.
Welcome to the show. I'm producer Pat Ford, filling in for David today as he is traveling up in Canada, visiting our neighbors to the north. He has some family members he's seeing up in Montreal. So it's going to be me hosting today as well as on Monday. And then we actually have Farron Cousins, who's going to step in and guest host a couple of shows for us next week. We do have a jam-packed show to get to today. We're going to be discussing everything from the Mar-a-Lago raid to the new IRS agents to Alex Jones to Marjorie Taylor Greene. But let's start things off today by talking about how it's looking even more unlikely that Joe Biden will be running for a second term in 2024. Now, even back when Biden was campaigning in 2020, I thought that Biden is just going to be a one-term president if he wins. He's convinced himself that he is the best shot at defeating Donald Trump and getting our country back on a path to normalcy. So he'll win his one term, he'll accomplish whatever he can, and then he'll step aside and let someone else take over. And the real reason is his age, right? Biden would be 82 by the time that he's sworn in for a second term, and 86 by the time he'd leave office after 8 years. I'm not trying to be ageist or anything like that, but there's just a reality to the fact that the president of the United States is the most important job in the world. You could argue it's one of the most stressful jobs out there, and you're always busy. You have to make these public appearances. Not everyone even lives into their 80s, let alone is working into their 80s, let alone has the most important job, arguably, in the entire world in their 80s. So I don't know if Joe Biden really wants to do that. And over the past couple of years, whenever a reporter has asked about Biden running again for a second term, the White House's position has always been that Biden intends to run, but they never make the full-on commitment, leaving them plenty of room to backtrack if they decide that, he's not really going to be doing this. The one time that Kamala Harris overstepped and said that he is going to be running, her office had to step back the statement the next day. Well, now we're hearing from Democratic Representative Carolyn Maloney, who represents part of New York City, that off the record, Joe Biden is not running for president again. Maloney was speaking to the New York Times editorial board, and the exchange went like this. New York Times' Eleanor Randolph said, quote, "Should President Biden run again?" Maloney said, "Off the record, he's not running again." New York Times' Jyoti Thotman, definitely mispronouncing that, said, "Not off the record, on the record." Maloney said, "On the record, no, he should not run again." So there was a bit of confusion about this on the record versus off the record thing. Both the reporter and the interviewee are supposed to confirm and agree that something is off the record before it's truly off the record, which you can see didn't happen here in this exchange. But her position sure sounded like Biden won't be running again for a second term. She also doesn't want him to run again. As to why Maloney might not want Biden to run again, that's probably because of his sagging approval numbers. They haven't been doing all that well in recent months, although it has ticked up a little bit over the past couple of weeks. He's back to around 40%, but maybe Maloney just sees Biden as a liability for the Democrats, and she wants him to step aside and to get a new face in there. Maloney later went on CNN to apologize for the statement and to say that Biden's a great president, and she doesn't think that Biden's going to run again, but she sure wants him to.
Mr. President, I apologize. I want you to run. I happen to think you won't be running, but when you run, or if you run, I will be there 100%. You have deserved it. You are a great president, and thank you for everything you've done for my state and all the states and all the cities in America. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, so a little awkward there, and it's a little bit unbelievable too, because while she is holding firm that she doesn't believe Biden will be running again, she also doesn't sound that sincere that she wants Biden to run again. I happen to believe her earlier comments about it are true rather than this apology and correction. And the real question in this conversation is, do Democrats have a better chance at holding the White House if it's Joe Biden at the top of the ticket in 2024 versus if it's someone else? Fill in the blank. It could be Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, whoever. I could be swayed either way on this because helping Biden, of course, is the power of incumbency. Presidents do tend to win re-election more often than not. But then there's also these liabilities, right? Like there's Biden's advanced age. That'll be even more of a liability the next time around because he'll be 4 years older. There's also his approval ratings, which at least now aren't so good. Maybe they'll improve between now and the next election. There's also the question of if Republicans are able to take back the House and or Senate, Will Biden be able to get all that much accomplished? Probably not. So then that's hard to make the case to the voters that you should reelect him. So to me, it seems a little bit too early to tell what's going to happen for sure, but I'm sticking with my position that I don't think that Joe Biden is going to be running for president again in 2024. And you better believe that that will set us up for an interesting election cycle if he chooses not to run again, because then both the Democrats and the Republicans will have to be having these contested primaries to see who their respective nominees will be, and that will definitely be entertaining and juicy to cover. Conspiracy theorist and InfoWars host Alex Jones has made it clear that he is done with Donald Trump, and he is indeed going to be backing Ron DeSantis if the Florida governor decides to run for president in 2024. Now, as much as I'd like to say, who cares what Alex Jones says, who cares what he thinks, the guy's a nutcase after all, we can dismiss him, this actually is pretty significant, because if he's able to turn his loyal viewers and listeners from being Trump supporters and make them Ron DeSantis voters, well, that could make the difference in a potential contested primary between the two candidates. Let's take a look at what Jones had to say on his InfoWars program earlier this week.
Pig-headedly support him a few years ago, even though I disagreed with his warp speed, because I thought that we had to keep him in office because of the nightmare scenario if Hillary or Biden got in, back before they were officially running. But that said, I am supporting DeSantis. DeSantis is just gone from being awesome to being unbelievably good. And I don't just watch a man's actions, as Christ said, judge a tree by its fruits. I can also look in his eyes on HD video, and I see the real sincerity. This is what Trump should be like. And I've been hammering this point, and he's doing it now. And we have someone that is better than Trump. Way better than Trump.
Now, at least in this clip, Alex Jones didn't articulate why exactly he likes Ron DeSantis more than Donald Trump. I'd imagine it has somewhat to do with the right-wing culture war issues that DeSantis has been championing over the past couple of years. Everything from making these decrees against socialism to passing his Don't Say Gay bill to the anti-trans rhetoric to saying that, oh, well, the left supposedly wants to defund the police, but here in Florida, we're funding the police. But the real sticking point for Jones seems to be the vaccine issue, the fact that Donald Trump is not an outright anti-vaxxer, at least as it pertains to the COVID vaccine, and that's really just because he wants to take credit for it, credit for Operation Warp Speed. And Jones predicted, of course, that the vaccine would do all these terrible things, but then you look back, and after billions of doses have been administered, everyone's doing just fine, so maybe he's moved the goalposts on that. Just as a reminder, here's a clip from back in December when Alex Jones did a special emergency Christmas Day edition of his show to declare that Trump is ignorant or evil because of his stance on the COVID vaccines.
This is an emergency Christmas Day warning to President Trump. You are either completely ignorant about the so-called vaccine gene therapy that you helped ram through with Operation Warp Speed, or you're one of the most evil men who has ever lived to push this toxic poison on the public and to attack your constituents when they simply try to save their lives and the lives of others. We're about to lay out the basic, incontrovertible facts that what you told Candace Owens just a few days ago is nothing but a raft of dirty lies.
Now, maybe it's illogical for me to try to get inside the head of Alex Jones and understand why exactly he's making this pivot, and who knows if Jones even believes half the things that he says, right? So maybe he doesn't even care one way or another between Trump or DeSantis, but it is a little bit strange, right? Because when Jones decided to hitch his wagon to Trump back in 2016, it at least made a little bit of sense because Trump at the time was painting himself as an anti-establishment figure. He was going to be an outsider who would shake things up in Washington and drain the swamp, as he liked to say. Ron DeSantis, though, on the other hand, he's pretty much just a standard Republican. Like, he knows how to play the culture war games better than the average Republican politician, and he's clearly learned a thing or two from Trump about how to deal with the media and how to present himself, but at the end of the day, he's a pretty establishment guy, which Jones has really never been into. So it's all very weird, and I do think it actually could be relevant to a potential matchup between the two figures. So we'll have to see if maybe Ron DeSantis ever decides to appear on Alex Jones's show like Donald Trump did back in 2016. Maybe he won't because DeSantis may realize that Jones is a little bit too toxic right now to associate with. But that's the latest. Alex Jones done with Donald Trump and moving over to Ron DeSantis. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a full-throated supporter of Donald Trump's big lie, and unlike most Republican politicians who simply pay lip service to the idea that Trump was robbed and Biden committed voter fraud along with the Democrats, I actually do believe that Greene believes this conspiracy theory because she's never met a conspiracy theory that she didn't like, and she loves Donald Trump so much, you mash those things together and poof, you have someone who is going to fall for the big lie. Well, the Georgia Congresswoman is now making the case that this midterm season, in order to fight the massive amounts of voter fraud that's supposedly being committed by the left, Republican voters have to go out and vote not just once, but maybe 2 or 3 times. Now, she could have been making a joke here, but even if so, she probably shouldn't be saying it, and we'll get to why exactly in a little bit. But first, here's the clip of her saying it.
Have hope, fight, support people like Representative Greene. Get out and vote with you and your 20 closest friends and neighbors in November.
And make it 40, vote 1, 2, 3 times, whatever.
Whatever the law will allow you to do, which in
Yes.
Georgia is almost anything. So
You never know.
You never know. Thank you so much for being here, for the hope, for your fight, and for communicating with us.
Absolutely.
We appreciate
I
it very
always
much.
will.
Yes,
Always
thank
will.
you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Well, good for Mallory Staples, at least, for jumping in there and saying, hold on, we don't encourage any law breaking, do whatever the law will allow you to do. But then again, the two are making it sound like the law will allow you to do anything in Georgia. You can vote multiple times and all of these different things, like it's one big joke, right? That's not good for trust in our democratic process. Now, this reminds me of the 2020 election during the presidential campaign when Donald Trump went to North Carolina and he told people to submit an absentee ballot and then also to go to the polls in person and try to vote that way, which, yes, is very much a crime. That would be voting twice, and that's actual voter fraud, which you can't get away with. It was arguably a crime for Donald Trump to encourage this as well, but surprise, surprise, he didn't face any consequences for it.
600,000 people could vote by absentee in this state.
I don't like that.
Are you confident in that system?
Well, they'll go out and they'll vote, and they're going to have to go and check their vote by going to the poll and voting that way, because if it tabulates, then they won't be able to do that. So let them send it in and let them go vote. And if their system's as good as they say it is, then obviously they won't be able to vote. If it isn't tabulated, they'll be able to vote. So that's the way it is. And that's what they should do.
Now, the problem when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump go out and make statements like this is that people actually take their word for it and act upon it. We've seen a number of examples from the 2020 election of people doing this. Here's just a few. Residents of Trump-loving retirement community arrested for allegedly voting twice in 2020 election. This took place at the Villages in Florida. And then we have a Republican official in Ohio facing charges for voting twice in the November election. There's plenty more examples. We've covered them on the show over the past couple of years, and it makes sense, right? Because these Republican voters want to take action in their own hands. They think that the Democrats are doing this left and right, so they might as well fight fire with fire and vote 2 or 3 times themselves, even though there's no basis for the claims that Donald Trump and his supporters have been making about the voter fraud issue. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the 2022 midterms we see even more examples, right? Because they've really ramped up the rhetoric about supposed voter fraud over the last couple of years. And so I'm sure we'll have dozens to talk about for you after the midterms are over with. And when confronted with how people are doing this on Republicans' behalf, I'm sure Marjorie Taylor Greene will just laugh it off or claim that it's not happening, or she'll just ignore it altogether. But it's incredibly irresponsible for Marjorie Taylor Greene to do this, and I'm sure she doesn't care at all. All right, we're going to throw to a break. We'll be back with much more of the David Pakman Show after this.
I've talked on the show before about how we have dealt with hacking, and it's a terrible feeling. You have to act quickly. The problem can get worse fast if you don't. And I now protect myself with Aura. Aura monitors my email addresses, passwords, bank accounts, credit cards, all of that stuff, and sends me alerts if anything has been compromised. It's identity theft protection and fraud monitoring all wrapped together. Aura continuously monitors the dark web looking for your private info. You get an alert as soon as something is discovered. Aura also does things like alert you if there are suspicious credit inquiries, if someone opens or tries to open an account in your name. I've gotten useful alerts from my Aura app, and I was able to act on them quickly. If you don't have a tool like Aura, I highly recommend it. And when you go to aura.com/Pakman, you will get Aura free for 14 days, which you can use to do things like see if your passwords have been leaked. The link is down below.
With young and deeply unqualified Congressman Madison Cawthorn losing his primary challenge in North Carolina, there was apparently an opening in the Tar Heel state for another 20-something-year-old Republican to enter Congress and be in completely over their head. Insert Bo Hines, 26 years old, who is running for Congress on the Republican ticket to represent the 13th District of North Carolina. He made headlines this week for not knowing the definition of a banana republic and confusing it with the retail clothing store. He did this while trying to make the point, by the way, that it is Joe Biden who is the one who is incompetent and incoherent. Hines was on the John Fredericks radio show, and the two were talking about the FBI raid on Donald Trump and the Biden administration's plan to hire more IRS agents. Republicans lately have loved to lump these two issues together as if they have anything to do with one another. They don't. More on that on the show later. And then Bo made the case that even though there's all of these corrupt people in the highest ranks of our government, it's not fair to call the United States a banana republic because that's an insult to banana republic stores all across the country. Let's take a look at the clip.
You get to Congress. Is it going to be real? Are we actually going to be willing to defund IRS, FBI, and things of that nature?
Well, I mean, we have to. I mean, we're at a point in our country now where we have a unregulated fourth branch of government that's targeting middle-class Americans on a daily basis. I mean, it's unbelievable what we're seeing. You know, a lot of people have likened the situation that's going on right now as, you know, they say we're in a banana republic. I think that's an insult to banana republics across the country. I mean, at least the manager of Banana Republic, unlike our president, knows where he is and why he's there and what he's doing. I mean, we have a president right now that doesn't know where he is, doesn't know who he is or what time it is. And he's attempting to run our country at the same time this fourth unregulated branch of government, which is the FBI, the DOJ, targeting Americans every single day. I mean, it's unbelievable.
My absolute favorite part of that clip is the radio host's reaction to it all. He has this look of, oh crap, this guy doesn't know what a banana republic is. Should I correct him? Should I just let it slide? What exactly do I do? How do I run cover for what's going on here? Now, the campaign is in damage control mode. They're trying to say that this was all just a joke, even though there was no laugh or smile or indication at all that what he was saying was in jest. Rob Burgess, his senior advisor, said in response, "It's clear now that the American people can understand a joke to the ever-growing list of things Democrats simply can't comprehend, alongside the economy, public safety, education, and foreign policy, just to name a few." So he's trying to brush it off as just a joke before quickly transitioning to these other topics, which I actually have to give Burgess credit for because these are actual issues facing the country. It's not just the typical culture war nonsense that the right loves to talk about these days. So definitely this is a funny story, but it actually serves as a reminder to maybe retire the term banana republic because it is often used as a pejorative against Latin American countries. It describes a small country that's politically and economically unstable and relies too much on exporting natural resources. The term was actually coined to describe countries that were being exploited by American companies like the United Fruit Company, which is now Chiquita Brands, which was a state-favored monopoly that exploited Latin American workers for profit for many years. Maybe once we retire the term, only the retail store will be left with the name Banana Republic, and then Bo Hines will be vindicated. He'll be correct if he ever tries to make this a statement again. We'll follow up on this race because Hines is up against Democrat Wiley Nickel, and the contest is seen as a toss-up, maybe a slight edge to Hines, but it's definitely winnable, so we'll have to see if we'll be able to win this race. The Pennsylvania Senate race is one of the most interesting elections this midterm cycle, as it presents Democrats with an opportunity to pick up a seat in the upper chamber and add to their majority. Democratic nominee John Fetterman is up against Republican Mehmet Oz, and this race was considered a toss-up just a couple of months ago, but it's now looking like Fetterman really is pulling away. The 538 average of polling has Fetterman up by 11 points, 49% to 38%. And part of this can be expected because Pennsylvania still, after all, is a blue state. Yes, they did vote for Trump in 2016. They've put people in power like Rick Santorum and Pat Toomey, but this is still blue territory, we can say. But another part of the reason is that Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, he really just seems to be a lot weaker of a candidate than many of us even expected. He's been painted successfully as a carpetbagger because he's from New Jersey. He's been painted as an elitist, which is also true because he has a net worth of about $100 million with 10 houses. More on that later on today's bonus show. We actually talked earlier in the week on the bonus show about his crudité video, which was filmed back in April, but it's going viral now. And John Fetterman was mocking him for it because he didn't know the name of the grocery store that he was in. He didn't know how buying vegetables works, and oftentimes the price that's listed is the price per pound versus the price per vegetable. So the Fetterman campaign was having a field day trolling him for that. Well, the Oz team is realizing that they have to make up some ground, and they've decided to go on the offense. They did so by releasing an attack ad on John Fetterman, and I don't think it's going to work out too well for them. Let's take a look at the ad.
Now that John Fetterman claims to be recovering, let's pull back his hoodie and examine what's in his head. Looks like he has some screws loose. What's this? Fetterman wants to release 1/3 of all prisoners. That's crazy! Spend more tax dollars, everything will cost more. That's nuts. Slow energy production, gas prices will skyrocket. That's ridiculous. Socialized medicine? Where do you get these crazy ideas? Now it makes sense. Better close it up. John Fetterman is crazier than you think.
All right, so in the ad, they attack John Fetterman for wearing a hoodie, which actually can be argued is an asset for him. The fact that he just dresses like the average Pennsylvania dude, he's not trying to be anything that he's not. He's not wearing a suit and tie just for the show. He likes wearing his basketball shorts and his sweatshirts. So I don't know if that's going to be all that effective for the Oz campaign. Then there's this bong that pops out of Fetterman's head, and I couldn't find out whether Fetterman himself uses cannabis, but he is one of the most pro-weed politicians in America. He supported it long before it was politically popular to do so, and the latest poll that I could find was that 58% of Pennsylvanians support legalizing marijuana, so I don't see how that is much of an attack either. Then there's this bit about releasing 1/3 of prisoners. Well, we do have the world's highest prison population, and if you're talking about releasing people who are nonviolent, people who are maybe drug offenders, that sort of thing, yeah, they should be let out of prison. That's totally cool. By the way, I thought Republicans were all of a sudden more amenable to this idea of prison and criminal justice reform because they think that the January 6th rioters are spending too much time behind bars. Maybe they forgot about that over at the Oz campaign. Then there's the thing about slowing energy production. Clearly, that's over the course of many years and decades, though, to move in the direction of renewable power. That will ultimately save people money, by the way, and save the planet in the long term. And then they put up the phrase free healthcare being held up on a sign by AOC, which they should have known that they shouldn't have used the term free healthcare or universal healthcare. It would have been much better if they used the term government takeover of healthcare. They said in the ad socialized medicine, but they should have put that on the sign as well because that's the type of phrase that pulls a lot better for Republicans. And then out pops Bernie Sanders, who is apparently the one who's really controlling John Fetterman. If you vote for John Fetterman, you're actually getting Bernie Sanders. I think this is another blunder, too, because, yeah, Bernie wasn't popular enough to win the Democratic primary, for example, either in 2016 or 2020, but he is quite popular as a politician. People think that he's principled, and he's especially popular in the Northeast, in states like Vermont, where he represents, and, you know, Pennsylvania is pretty close by, too, so I'd imagine he's pretty popular there. So even though I'm no Republican, I think that I could have done a much better job at making this attack ad on John Fetterman because this just looks absolutely cartoonish. It's a terrible presentation, very over the top, and I think the Oz team could have done a lot better. Let's hope that Fetterman is able to grow or at least maintain his lead. We'll be able to land Donald Trump another loss if Fetterman picks up the victory here. But you know what Trump will do if Mehmet Oz ends up losing. He'll just distance himself from Oz and say, well, Oz didn't really run all that close to me, and that's why he lost. But nonetheless, it will be a glorious victory if we're able to pick up this seat in Pennsylvania. Did Donald Trump, as president, have the right to unilaterally declassify documents just based on his say-so? That's one of the conversations we've been having ever since the FBI raid on Donald Trump's home in Florida last week took place. And we know that the American right wing, they've been throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks as it pertains to the FBI raid in Mar-a-Lago, saying everything from this is a witch hunt to the FBI planted documents on Donald Trump. But one of the more pernicious claims made in right-wing media circles lately has been that even if Donald Trump did have classified documents in his possession in his basement in Mar-a-Lago, that's A-okay because presidents, at the end of the day, are the ultimate authority as to what is classified information and what gets declassified, so it doesn't matter. It's kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card. If the president does it, it's not illegal, as Richard Nixon once said. Here's one such example of this claim being made by Kash Patel, who is a former Trump administration official who now works over at Truth Social, also known as Truth Central. He made the claim to Fox News' Maria Bartiromo over the weekend on her Sunday show. Let's take a look at that.
In October of 2020, he issued a sweeping declassification order for every Russiagate document and every single Hillary Clinton document. Then on the way out of the White House, he issued further declassification orders, declassifying whole sets of documents. And this is a key fact that most Americans are missing. President Trump, as the sitting president, is a unilateral authority for declassification. He can literally stand over a set of documents and say, these are now declassified. And that is done with definitive action immediately.
So Kash Patel here in this video makes it sound like there's almost a magic spell involved, like Donald Trump can just wave his hand over the documents in question and then poof, they are no longer classified information, so nothing to be seen here, nothing to be investigated. Well, you may be shocked to learn that this is not actually how the process works. Presidents do have the ability to declassify certain types of information, but there's a procedure attached to it. Certain executive branch officials have the authority to deem information as confidential, secret, or top secret, and if it's ultra top secret, then the document will get the SCI designation. Some of the documents in Donald Trump's possession had this very distinction. There are also rules limiting how the documents can be stored, physically transported, or electronically transmitted. When someone with the proper authority moves to declassify the documents, the executive branch has a process to involve the other agencies that might be affected. And certainly the president is one of the people who can move to make something declassified. It's rarely done, but it can happen. However, they need to undergo this very same process, and it's not as easy as waving a magic wand as Kash Patel would have you believe. Here's former CIA director and former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, who would know a thing or two about this very topic, being even more frank than I have been about the process for how to declassify documents.
So you're obviously very well versed in dealing with classified material. Former Trump aides are now trying to claim that there was a standing order by the president, Donald Trump, to declassify any document that left the West Wing for Trump's resident. Is that how declassification works, even with some of the nation's most guarded secrets?
That's nonsense, and he knows it. The reality is that there is a process for declassifying information. And if presidents want to declassify, they have to follow that process, which basically requires that it be referred to the agencies that are responsible for classifying that material. They have something to say as to whether or not that material should be declassified. So there is nothing that I'm aware of that indicates that a formal step was taken by this president to, in fact, declassify anything. Right now, this is pretty much BS.
It's all a bunch of BS, says Leon Panetta. And then there's an added layer of security when you're talking about nuclear documents, which Donald Trump is accused of having in his possession, as documents about nuclear material are subject to the Atomic Energy Act, which the president does not have unilateral authority over. Now, secondary to this entire discussion is that even if the documents weren't classified, or even if they were deemed declassified by Donald Trump right before he left office with his magic wand, it wouldn't serve to get the former president out of hot water, because none of the things that Donald Trump is being investigated for require the documents be classified. The Espionage Act violations, concealing documents, and obstruction of justice are the three things that the FBI is looking into as it pertains to Donald Trump. Those are not dependent on whether the information that Trump had in his possession were classified. He's not supposed to be taking, hiding, or destroying any of the presidential records, regardless of their classification status, and the government asked him to return the items. He didn't willingly hand them over. He didn't give back all of the documents anyway, and so it doesn't matter whether or not they were classified. Final point on this, because the right has been talking nonstop about Hillary Clinton and her emails over the past couple of weeks. They used to say that Hillary Clinton, she could not be trusted to handle secret information, therefore she could not be president, because when she was Secretary of State, she had secret documents in her Gmail account that was being operated through a private server, and it was grossly negligent, and we just can't trust her with these top secret documents. Well, if that was ever your concern, but you also now have this position that the president can just declassify whatever they want on a whim, doesn't this render the point that they were making about Hillary in 2016 completely moot? Like, why would it matter that Hillary Clinton supposedly wasn't able to be trusted with classified information if she would have the power as president to just declassify whatever she wants anyway? But the contradictions, we know when it comes to the right wing, they don't matter. It's all about twisting and turning yourself. Anything that you can do to defend Donald Trump, no matter how ridiculous it makes you look. Fox News host Tucker Carlson was off last week. I'm sure many of you were absolutely devastated by this. There was even a conspiracy theory floating around that the FBI waited to raid Donald Trump's home in Florida until Tucker Carlson was off the airwaves so that he wouldn't be in studio to give a fiery response to it all. Well, one of the guest hosts last week for Tucker was Brian Kilmeade, who aired a doctored photo of the judge who signed off on the search warrant of Donald Trump, depicting him hanging out with Ghislaine Maxwell. But the host on last Friday's show is the one I want to talk about here today, and that was none other than Tulsi Gabbard, which may come as a shock to you all, right? Because Tulsi Gabbard, I thought she was a liberal. She ran for president in 2020. On the Democratic side, she was called even more progressive and more principled than Bernie Sanders, of all people. Well, it's not clear that she ever was those things or ever held strong ideological beliefs at all, or if she was always grifting, or as some allege that she's working for a foreign country. That's what Hillary Clinton said. She's been inching, Tulsi that is, more and more to the right over time, going on Fox News, voting present on Donald Trump's impeachment vote to heal the country. And she also spoke at CPAC last year, and now the grift is complete because she has filled in for Tucker Carlson on his show, Tucker Carlson Tonight. And what did she do during the show? Did she talk about universal health care, or did she talk about criminal justice reform, or any of these other issues that a true progressive would want to share with the Fox News audience? No, she instead decided to run interference for Donald Trump. Let's watch some of Tulsi's monologue and pick it apart and see if there's anything progressive here at all in this commentary, or if it's like anything else that you could find from a Fox News personality.
Now, whatever your views are on Donald Trump, there's no denying that the unprecedented raid on his Palm Beach home earlier this week has set our country on a dangerous new course, and there's no turning back. The FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago changed the country that we grew up in. We grew up believing that, hey, our government will apply the law equally to all Americans, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. We're seeing more and more that that country no longer exists.
Okay, so we're only 26 seconds into the monologue, and I already have to cut it short and step in here because there's already a lot to break down. So Tulsi says that the raid on Mar-a-Lago was unprecedented, which, yes, it was, but also what Donald Trump did as president and what he's accused of doing in a criminal context, that's also unprecedented. So, as David likes to say, when you have unique inputs, you're going to have unique outputs. Just by saying that what the FBI and the DOJ did was unprecedented, that doesn't mean that it was necessarily wrong or unjustified. Tulsi then talks about how the FBI raid has set us on a dangerous course from which we cannot turn back. Again, it was Donald Trump who set us on this course. The FBI was merely responding to the actions that the former president allegedly did, as is their job as a law enforcement agency. That is, after all, what they do. And then Tulsi appeals to the elderly Fox News demographic by giving this rainbows and rose petals and gumdrop depiction of the America we once knew, the America that we knew growing up, saying that that America is long gone because now the law is no longer being applied equally. And this is dumb for a couple of reasons. Like, for one, it never really was this way. We never really had this glossy depiction of America and having a perfect criminal justice system. We've always had a two-tiered justice system, especially as it breaks down on racial and class lines. But then also, what the FBI and the DOJ are doing investigating Donald Trump because they believe he committed crimes, that is applying the law equally. Applying the law unequally would be saying, like, okay, well, we think he's guilty. We think that he did illegal stuff here, but he's a former president after all. He's a billionaire. He's a powerful person. So we're going to let him get away with it. We're just going to look the other way. So that would be unjustified. That would be a backwards depiction of the country. So it's taken me, 2 minutes here to break down the nonsense that Tulsi was able to spew in 26 seconds. Let's keep playing the clip and see if it gets any better at all.
Law enforcement at the highest levels of government, whether it's the DOJ, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and now even the IRS, have been weaponized to target the political opponents of the Uniparty, the permanent Washington, and the Biden regime. Attorney General Merrick Garland has already issued a stark warning to anyone who dares to disagree with these tactics that are all hallmarks of a dictatorship.
Let me address recent unfounded attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and Justice Department agents and prosecutors. I will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked.
So you are not allowed to disagree with the FBI. That is the new message.
All right, so we again have to stop it here and jump in. So Tulsi first brings up the story about Biden hiring a bunch of new IRS agents by way of the Inflation Reduction Act as a way to raise funds for government programs and to make sure that people making over $400,000 a year aren't cheating too much on their taxes. She tries to tie that in with the FBI's investigation of Donald Trump. Objection, relevance, how are these two things related in the slightest? They're not. And then Tulsi plays a clip of Merrick Garland refuting the idea that the DOJ isn't just following the law and that there's some political motivations behind what they're doing. And Tulsi twists that into saying you're not allowed to disagree with the FBI as if your free speech rights are being curtailed. That's even what they had as the lower third graphic. You're not allowed to disagree with the FBI. Completely absurd and definitely a manipulation of the video that she played. So there's Tulsi Gabbard for you, filling in for Tucker Carlson, definitely taking a page or two out of his propaganda playbook. It's long been speculated that Tulsi is vying for a job at Fox News, and after seeing that, what was clearly an audition, it does feel like that's the career path that her career is heading in. When she left Congress at the beginning of last year, there was speculation as to what was next for Tulsi. I always thought it was a Fox News gig, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. Maybe they just want to have her train a little bit more with these guest appearances. Maybe they're trying to find the right dollar amount for her salary. Maybe they're trying to figure out what the best time slot is for her. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if in the next 6 months, Tulsi has her own show on Fox News. We're going to go to a break. We'll be back with more of the David Pakman Show right after this. The American right wing has a number of boogeymen, but one that has withstood the test of time is the IRS, which is why many on the right now are going apoplectic over the Biden administration's plan to hire 87,000 new IRS agents with the $80 billion that they're getting from the Inflation Reduction Act as a way to beef up tax enforcement and ultimately increase revenue for the federal government. So the right, they're trying to tie in the FBI raid of Donald Trump's home with the hiring of these IRS agents as if the two things have anything to do with one another. I already showed you a clip of Tulsi Gabbard trying to connect these dots earlier in the program, but she's not the only one. We also have Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who asked, after today's raid on Mar-a-Lago, what do you think the left plans to use those 87,000 new agents for? Rick Grinnell, a former Trump administration official, tweeted, quote, the FBI raids Trump's house and the Democrats vote to add 87,000 new IRS agents to go after Americans. Wake up, America. And then we have Indiana Congressman Jim Banks, who said, if the FBI can raid the home of a former president, imagine what 87,000 more IRS agents will do to you. Well, the only connection that I can see between these two things is that they involve agencies at the federal government under the executive branch. But aside from that, it seems pretty weird to lump these two things together unless you want to fearmonger and not care about the facts. But then the rhetoric starts to get dangerous because when you hear from some of these right-wing personalities, they're trying to talk about how the Biden administration wants to not only add to the IRS force, they also want to give them new weapons. Brian Kilmeade, for example, suggested on Fox News last week that these new IRS agents are ready to hunt down and kill middle-class taxpayers with the weapons that they have. Let's take a look at the video.
The so-called Inflation Reduction Act also says that $80 billion budget is for, quote, increased enforcement, operational improvements, and customer service. What kind of customer service? We don't have to wonder. Before the IRS took it down yesterday, there was a posting, watch this, on their website that listed the job requirements for a special agent's position. The major duties require agents to, quote, carry a firearm and be willing to use deadly force if necessary. A little like James Bond, but instead of hunting down evil maniacs, these agents hunt down and kill middle-class taxpayers that don't pay enough. It's Joe Biden's new army. Americans are rightly concerned about this. Got a new poll I'll share with you. Shows 45% of the country fears the IRS will increase the number of audits. According to the CNBC, which is another business network, the second best, financial experts are predicting the bill will spark more audits for small business owners.
So what Brian Kilmeade was referring to in this clip is the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division, which is nothing new. It's been around for over 100 years. They've always had firearms training, and it's because they go after things like money laundering schemes and cybercrime and situations that could get violent or deadly. And so it makes sense for those agents to be armed, but the average IRS auditor, when undergoing a routine audit of someone, is unarmed. No surprise there. We also had Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley making this very same point that Kilmeade made. He went on Fox and Friends and said, quote, "Are they going to have a strike force that goes in with AK-15s already loaded, ready to shoot some small business person in Iowa?" So first of all, he said AK-15, which I thought wasn't a gun. I thought he was mixing up AR-15s and AK-47s. He may have mixed them up, but luckily he gets a pass because it is a gun that exists, although it's quite rare. But if he was a Democrat and the gun didn't exist, you better believe he would be raked over the coals for making a statement like that and not having an understanding of firearms. But he just barely passed the test there. But the broader point to his question is that no, he's just trying to feed into a conspiracy theory as to what the Biden administration wants to accomplish by hiring all these agents and acting like it's something nefarious or out of the ordinary. But also the very idea that these agents are going to go after people who make $50,000 a year, $60,000, $70,000 a year, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because first of all, they've already said, and it's been outlined in the text, you can look at it, they're only going to look for trying to recover money from people who make $400,000 a year or more. But if you don't take them at their word, just think about it logically. Just look at the math of the situation. So does it make sense as an agency, when you have limited time, money, resources, to go after Joe Schmo who makes $50K a year with the hopes of maybe recovering an extra couple of $100 or $1,000? Or does it make sense to put that time and energy into scrutinizing someone who makes $10 million a year or more, with the idea that maybe you can recover another $1 million, couple of $1 million? Obviously, it makes sense to investigate the wealthy, and also more revenue for the government means that we're going to be able to lower our debt and deficit, all else being equal. I thought that the right wing was in support of that. But, of course, we know that debt and deficit, they're a political football, which at this point, it's just not all that convenient for Republicans to play with, so they'll put that issue aside for now. So on multiple fronts, the right-wing fear-mongering about these new IRS agents doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's the perfect opportunity for millionaires and billionaires, the people who are in charge over at Fox News, to convince middle-class earners that the IRS is going to come after them, so that they're opposed to the Inflation Reduction Act. They're opposed to move like this, even though it's really not going to affect them at all. It's going to impact the big money earners, and that's exactly what Fox News and the right-wing media sphere does best. A 16-year-old pregnant girl in Florida will not be able to get an abortion because a court has decided that she is not sufficiently mature enough to decide for herself whether it's the right decision to carry the fetus to term or to get an abortion. This is absolute madness. The girl's name is not being provided as she is under 18 and they want to protect her identity. But Florida has a new 15-week abortion ban, the constitutionality of which is being questioned, but it's staying in place for now at least. The state brought that threshold down from the 24 weeks back a couple months ago. And there is a state law in Florida that requires minors to get parental consent for an abortion, which I would argue should not be necessary, because even though you're a minor, it's still your body after all. It's still going to be a decision that involves you for the next 18 years plus. So it seems like they only had this rule in place as a way to embarrass the girl who becomes pregnant, to have her go to her parents and explain the situation that she's in and try to get their approval. But as it pertains to this story, the girl in question could not get her parental consent because she is parentless and she lives with a relative and has an appointed guardian. But that wasn't good enough for a circuit court judge who denied the parental consent waiver, and a 3-judge panel upheld the decision. A statement from the appeals court said, "The appellant had not established by clear and convincing evidence that she was sufficiently mature to decide whether to terminate her pregnancy." So per the state of Florida, the girl is not mature enough to decide whether an abortion makes sense for her, yet she is somehow mature enough to carry a baby to term, give birth, and raise it to adulthood. How does that make any sense at all? Something tells me that being a parent requires a lot more maturity than deciding whether a medical procedure for someone in your position makes sense for you. So this is just the latest example of Republican barbarity on the topic. Like in the lead up to Roe versus Wade getting overturned, when we could kind of see the writing on the wall because of Trump's Supreme Court justices, and then when the draft opinion was leaked, and then when it was made official back in June, all along the right wing assured the rest of the country that they were going to be responsible on this abortion issue if Roe got overturned, that they would not be completely draconian in how they addressed the matter. And they would say things like, oh, well, we'll have exceptions for rape. Well, now that's being put into question because they realized how logistically challenging that would be, because it could easily lead to an increase in false rape accusations. Then they'd say things like, oh, well, there'll be exceptions for life of the mother. When the life of the mother is put at risk, you'll be able to get an abortion in that instance. But now they're realizing that you can't always assess risk levels in this way, where it's like 100% that the mother's going to survive if she has the child, or 100% chance that she's going to die if she has the child. Like, usually it's in this gray area where you don't know with any certainty what's going to happen. So who's going to decide whether or not you fit under that exception for life of the mother? And they also used to say, oh, well, if Roe versus Wade gets overturned, then you're going to be able to travel to a different state to get an abortion if it's illegal in your state. Now we're starting to see states try to criminalize that very practice as well. So the reality has been a lot more draconian than many of us could have even imagined. And if there's any silver lining at all in the horrors that these countless women have had to deal with across the country, including in this story, it's that maybe it will incentivize people to go out and vote in the fall. Maybe Democrats will be able to ultimately hold on to the House of Representatives. Maybe they'll be able to pick up a couple of seats in the Senate so that we can move to eliminate the filibuster and work to codify Roe versus Wade into law. That has to be the path forward, because we absolutely cannot trust Republicans with control over this abortion issue. And sadly, we're probably going to see plenty more cases like this one out of Florida. It's absolutely sickening. If you've been watching the show for a while, or if you're just aware of the American system of government more generally, then you'll know what gerrymandering is. Very simply, it's when state legislatures draw up district maps in a way that will benefit them. The party that's already in control gets to do this, so it's effectively a way for politicians to choose their voters rather than voters choosing their politicians. So, for example, if you're a Republican state, but you have a big Democratic city in the state, and let's say you're awarded 5 districts from the census that gets done every 10 years, you may decide to make the city one district with the more rural areas 4 separate districts, so then you'll have a 4-to-1 advantage. Or if you can get away with it, maybe you'll break up that city into 5 pieces, combining those pieces with the more rural areas that may outweigh the parts of the city in population, so then you can get a 5-to-0 advantage. That's kind of how it works. It's a practice that really has to be done away with, and there are laws against going too far with it, like by breaking up districts by ethnic neighborhoods. You can't do too much with that. These districts have to be contiguous, but the states over the years have been able to get away with quite a lot as it pertains to redistricting. Like, for example, let's take a look at this map. Here is a picture of Dan Crenshaw's oddly shaped district in the Houston area. It looks like maybe a salamander, if you can say that it resembles anything at all. So this is some pretty extreme gerrymandering here. Well, every now and then the courts will step in and strike down one of these egregiously gerrymandered maps, which is good to see because that means that there's some accountability at least. But the problem is that it's often too little too late, and we may go through an election cycle or 2 or 3 or 4 before these illegally drawn districts can be corrected. corrected. And that's exactly the situation that we're finding ourselves in now going into the 2022 midterms. Since January, district maps in the Republican-controlled states of Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Ohio have been deemed unlawful, but rather than putting an immediate stop to it, they've been allowed to go forward for this election cycle. The states are challenging their respective judges' rulings, and the plan is to just figure it all out later. And it's not an insignificant number of seats, too. It's about 10% of seats in the House of Representatives that are affected by this ruling. And it's going to end up awarding Republicans about 5 to 7 seats that they otherwise wouldn't be able to win. They're just going to be essentially entitled to these seats. Keep in mind, Republicans only need to pick up about 10 seats or even fewer potentially to win back the House in 2022. So this is definitely the type of thing that we need emergency relief on, right? We need the Supreme Court to step in and say, no, you can't use these maps. They've been determined to be illegal and you can't use it for the midterms. But predictably, they're quite laxed on this issue. The Supreme Court is very conservative right now, 6-3 conservative, and this is the type of ruling that's going to benefit them and their political side in the meantime. So they're happy to see it be allowed to be used because they know that it's going to increase their power. So they're totally fine with it. They're not going to step in. And it's yet another example of the 2016 election rearing its ugly head, and how Donald Trump being able to appoint those 3 Supreme Court justices has put us in a terrible position as a country. And it's also part of the reason why 538 right now expects that Republicans have about a 79-80% chance of winning back the lower chamber in 2022. Sure, it's not just this issue, it's other things too, like we probably should have picked up more seats in the House in 2020. There's also the historical trend of how the party in charge that has the White House tends to have a bad first midterm. So there's other things working against us, sure, but also gerrymandering plays a significant role. And it's really something that we cannot have in a functioning democracy, something that we have to work on, and we have to fix this process, or at least have a way to undo these maps immediately when they're determined to be illegal. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the David Pakman Show. My thank you to David for allowing me to fill in today as he is up in Canada at the moment. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'm going to be back on Monday hosting once again. See you then.
I protect all of my passwords, accounts, and devices using Aura. I get instant alerts about threats, like if my email or password are found on the dark web, so I can fix the problem fast. Try Aura free for 2 weeks using my link below.